Dr. David Nolan. Welcome to the Uneducated PT podcast, where people a lot smarter than me teach me about things that I don't understand. So before we get into the topics that we're going to discuss, can you just give the listeners a little bit of background into the work that you do and how you came across what you're working on at the moment?
Sure. I suppose my title, anywhere else we'd be called lecturers. In DCU we're assistant professors and associate professors. So I'm an assistant professor of sport and exercise science up in DCU. I work in the School of Health and Human Performance. So in my role there, I'm a lecturer across the strength and conditioning modules, help out in the exercise physiology, and then across the master's modules then in strength and conditioning and athletic therapy, and then also supervise PhD students and doctoral students across several disciplines. So that's kind of my day job. Background, I'm a sports scientist by trade, I suppose. So my undergraduate degree was in Limerick, and then ended up eventually pursuing a PhD in DCU under Dr. Brendan Egan there, and was lucky enough then to end up getting a position in the faculty. So day to day, lecturer and researcher. Research interests then, probably touch on them today, quite broad across originally the female athlete, sex differences in exercise, a lot around menstrual cycle, hormonal contraceptives, their influences, and more recently then moving into kind of men's health space, looking at testosterone therapy and different uses in testosterone right across the spectrum, from anabolic steroid use in say sport and bodybuilders, right across the therapeutic uses of testosterone in health. Then a few other areas in sports performance and even historical stone lifting sprinkled in there then as well.
Which we'll most certainly get into. What made you go down that route of pursuing, a sports background? Was it a passion of yours when you were younger? Were you playing sport when you were younger?
Yeah. When I was a child, I still get slagged about it. I wanted to be a herpetologist.
Sorry, what?
A herpetologist.
Which is, sorry.
So a herpetologist is the field of science that studies reptiles. So there used to be a great guy on the TV back then, Austin Stevens, I think was his name. He was one of these wildlife photographers. So he used to be going through the jungles trying to get pictures of these snakes and everything like that. Not a lot of money in that probably, so I went into sports science so that probably wasn't the best avenue either. Probably kind of your typical route during adolescence, involved in sport, Gaelic football, martial arts, got into weight training, was always interested in that, but I was always academically strong, I suppose. So I was interested in science, so kind of probably exposed to documentaries, saw VO2 max, that kind of stuff in the lab, looked cool, so I was interested in doing that kind of stuff. So yeah, I remember sitting with the guidance counsellor and they were like, oh, what course do you want to do? I was like, I want to do sports science in UL, and I think it was like 490, 500 points around the time. And they're like, oh, well, what are you going to do if you don't get the points? I was like, well, I'll get the points. I was an arrogant little shit, probably.
Were you always academic even when you were younger?
Yeah, I was always academically strong. Just one of those things. But on my CEO, I had UL number one, and I think I had UCD number two. So, but the way the points worked, if I didn't get in UL, I wasn't getting into UCD. So it was an all or nothing. And it ended up, I was lucky enough, and then ended up going to UL. And yeah, it's as a sports scientist, it's gas. In the table quiz, if sports questions comes up, oh, name the footballer, can't name it. I'm not good on sport trivia. So I'm interested more in the science and the physiology of performance. And also I've got exposed to health kind of disciplines throughout my time then as well. So very much interested in the role exercise and sport can play in our health and performance. But yeah, interest in actual sport, kind of can take it or leave it a lot of the time.
So it was either reptiles or sports science.
Yeah, and it's probably, some people would joke, it's probably a reflection of my own character. Slippery reptile.
What would you say to any young people who want to pursue a career in sports science? What's your reflections on it so far?
I would strongly encourage it. So the last couple of years I've been at higher options, working the stand and on different career panels, and people would be discouraged. Parents will discourage, like, oh, well, there's no jobs in it. And I think we need to stop viewing university as just training people to go into a job. Yes, there's vocational courses, there's nursing and physiotherapy and all these ones that lead and teaching to go straight into a job, but that's not what the university is about. That's not what academia originally is about. It's about learning how to think, to be a critical thinker, to come up with new ideas, and then give you a wide range of skills that you can apply in a lot of different jobs. So sports science is great in the fact that it doesn't train you to be something specific. It trains you as a generalist, and it's great for someone that's interested in science first and foremost. It is a science course. It's chemistry, physics, and biology all applied to and taught through the lens of sport and health. So it gives you a taster of all those, and then you can pick where you want to specialise. So if you like science, you're interested in sport and exercise, but you don't know exactly where you want to go, it's a great kind of start point. Because a lot of people, it shocks me the amount of students that want to do physiotherapy. And I asked them, well, have you ever shadowed a physiotherapist? Have you ever gone in and done a day in the hospital with a physiotherapist? No. It's like you don't even know a physio, because we all see the physio running out onto the pitch, on match day. But that's only a very small portion of what a physiotherapist does, and your training is very small in that area. Where most of physiotherapy is in the hospital setting, working with someone after stroke, someone with COPD, with breathing issues, neurological issues. The musculoskeletal, the sports and exercise science is only a very small part of what physios do. So if someone thinks that that's all it is, it's just funny that we all want to be we think we want to be in these careers without ever shadowing or being in that environment. We have this kind of romanticized version of what that environment's going to be like. We see the same in elite sport. These sports science students think, elite sport must be all so professional, and everyone is in there working really hard and everything is perfect. When you talk to someone that's in there, it's controlled chaos. Yeah. Humans are messy. We're chaotic people, and elite athletes, they're very elite at one narrow bandwidth, and that's their sport. Usually their life is a mess outside those things because they're hyper specialist in one area.
Yeah. Well, we were talking before you came on about people have their ideals about they're going into this kind of career and this is where they're going to end up, and then obviously it doesn't plan out the way they want it to be, and that can kind of take a little bit of an ego hit. I suppose with sports science or any of them kind of pursuits, you probably have to have an open mind that you could end up down any real field with this. Like you said, in terms of you've so many different kind of topics and subjects that you've kind of went down rabbit holes in.
I think so, and there was someone speaking at Higher Options this year, and I can't remember his name, but when we look at the data, careers as such are a thing of the past, and what I mean by that, it used to be you join an organisation or a career field, a trade at 18, 20 years of age, and you were there until you retire.
Yeah.
What we're seeing in kind of corporate world now, or even just in the world of work, we see people loyalty to a certain institution or company is not there anymore. That's a thing of the past. So people are moving much more frequently, job hopping. Like you talk to anyone that works in pharma, I have a couple of friends. If you've been in a pharma company more than 3 or 4 years, that's actually seen as a bit strange. You're like, well, why haven't you jumped to another pharma company yet? That's the culture there, you change every couple of years. But what we've seen in trends now is people don't only change jobs more frequently, people are changing career. So it seems to be that people are doing one career per decade, seems to be the kind of things that we're seeing in Gen Z and these younger ones. So just what you're going to do in your 20s isn't necessarily the job or even the industry you're going to be in your 30s and your 40s. So that's what I think we need to start viewing. And again, DCU, we have DCU Futures program, this idea of developing transversal skills. And these are skills that we can use across any industry, your teamwork, your communication, leadership. Because again, that's why I like the concept of being a scientist, being able to handle data, to be able to look at problems objectively and be able to kind of distill the information and have nuanced conversations and be able to actually understand context is important. Because I could take it from a decade in science and then go into business. A lot, we'll see, McKinsey is a great example of a big consulting company where they're very analytical and data driven. So I could do a decade of being a research scientist and then move there and apply those skills in a corporate consultancy way and then go into a completely different industry. So this idea of we need to stop thinking that college is to prepare someone for a job, it's to give them skills that they can just go out and be valuable across society as a whole.
That makes a lot of sense. What do you think has changed in the fact that Gen Z are more open to, is it they're more kind of willing to risk in terms of changing careers, or is it just the dynamics have changed from before?
I don't know. It's again, it's not my area especially, so
Yeah.
anything I say is just opinion, but I think people would use the word entitled, but entitled is maybe the wrong word. They're probably less willing to put up with inequality or put up with a standard of living that they're not happy with. So some people would call it entitled, other people would call it, they just want to demand a higher quality of living or a higher standard of living. And I think we exist in a much more transactional world now, where it very much used to be, you went into a business where maybe it was a family company and you knew the boss and you knew the family, and there might be the family in the village or the town, so there maybe was a sense of loyalty to that person, because if you went home, it's like, oh, I'm packing in that job. Your father's probably like, you're not. I have to see him down the pub Friday night.
Yeah.
I don't want him saying you've sacked off the job. Where corporations are faceless now, so if I go in, if I'm a young person, I'm working in a big multinational, I'm just a number to them. So you don't feel like you're betraying any loyalty or you have any sense of loyalty to a company. So I think that it's just, and societies now are much more mobile. People are moving around more with the advent, I suppose, of the EU and just the ease of travel. We just move around a lot more, so to relocate isn't as much of a big deal. And I suppose, again, we won't get too political, but in a place where there is a housing crisis, the young people, they don't own a home, so it's not like they've put roots down anywhere. So for them, if they get a better job opportunity, what am I doing? I'm just letting out in a lease to go rent somewhere else, so it doesn't matter. So it's not like they have roots put down. So I think that combination of wanting a higher standard of living, valuing work-life balance much more, and just the fact that the economy is doing so much better. Businesses are finding it hard to fill jobs, so that means that the power is in the potential employees, that they can be much more demanding in what they want, because if you're not going to give me what I want, there is another business that probably will.
Speaking of different topics and avenues that you can go down, you were on the radio recently speaking about the enhanced games, and obviously we're going to talk about that as well as a multitude of different topics. Before I get your thoughts on the enhanced games, could you actually just explain to the listeners who haven't heard about it yet what it is essentially?
Okay, so the enhanced games, it is a competition taking place next summer in Vegas, and the idea of the enhanced games is to put it crudely, the steroid Olympics essentially. So what they are doing, they're running different events, weightlifting, swimming, 100-meter sprint, and they are allowing the use of performance enhancing drugs in their athletes. Their idea is, they claim it's to advance the limits of human potential by embracing the advances in technology and pharmaceuticals and doping protocols to push limits. That is their claim. That's what they're putting forward as this kind of competition to push the boundaries. What it is in reality, we can talk about that, but in a nutshell, these athletes that have volunteered and said they're going to appear, they're being brought into the enhanced games, they're getting medical supervision, and they're going to go on performance enhancing drugs for a period of time and then end up competing in this event. So the athletes are getting, I think the appearance fee varies, but about $100,000 for just an appearance fee, another $250,000 if they win their event, and then an additional $250,000 if they break the world record in their event then as well.
So Irish swimmer Shane Ryan has joined the Enhanced Games, a controversial event that permits the use of performance enhancing drugs. Ryan stated his decision was driven by the need to earn money after a career in which he felt underpaid, and he also views the games as a form of entertainment and a chance to push his body to new limits in a controlled environment. Sport Ireland have strongly condemned this decision. What do you think? Do you think I suppose a consenting adult who was already given a lot to the sport has the autonomy to make his own decisions whether he wants to get paid more?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to tease out. This is why I think as a society we need to get better at having nuanced conversations and try to be as objective as we can. And my thoughts are still not probably fully formed on it, but I can appreciate all sides of the argument. So the enhanced games itself, from a purely academic scientific perspective, it's fascinating. I find it fascinating because I am interested in, we've allowed technology to advance every other area of sports performance apart from pharmaceutical advances in technology. So
Can you explain that a little bit for listeners?
yeah, so if we think of like, we've allowed sports science support the use of laboratory, the use of all these physiological testing. We see the advent of super shoes.
Yeah.
We see, the lycra. We've a load of scientific advances in the equipment, the training techniques, we do altitude training, we do these altitude chambers, heat chambers. We use all these methods and scientific approaches to enhance human performance and athletic performance. But the one area of technology that we don't allow is pharmaceutical or pharmacokinetic advances in technology, or to even experiment with those. So from a purely academic, scientific curiosity perspective, it's fascinating. If we did allow it, what could we do? How far could we push the human body? But that's intellectual curiosity. What we do has an impact at societal level, and we have to always think of unforeseen consequences. So I find it fascinating, and I think we need more research into that area, and probably research has been hesitant to go into this area, and there's ethical reasons. We might be even dangerous to do some of these research we want to do. But I find that fascinating, and I'd love to be involved in research in that area. Shane Ryan, as an individual athlete, I don't think there's much conversation needed there, because again, who are we to judge that individual person? Because Shane would put the argument forward that he was on a very low kind of stipend when he was a professional athlete, not enough to sustain him in his retirement. He's given everything he can to the sport, and he's going to, now in his kind of late stage of his career, he's going to go and get, make a lot of money that's going to sustain him. And yes, people would argue that his legacy is tarnished, but he would make the argument like, no one really cares that much about swimming. Anyways, like 2 weeks ago, very few people knew his name. He's like, now everyone knows his name, and it's probably for an infamous reason. But again, I'm not going to judge a single individual. He's made his decision. I said, consenting adult, he retired from his sport, and he went and did that afterwards. When it comes to performance enhancing drugs or drug use in general, I would be quite a libertarian, where if it is a consenting adult, understands the risks and rewards ratio, and they're not doing anything illegal, and they're not causing harm to other people, well then by all means, who am I to judge you taking whatever substance you want? Once you're not competing in a drug tested sport. Like if you're illegally doping in a sport and that is cheating, that's a different question altogether. So that's kind of where we're at in that. Now probably the big thing that people are missing about the enhanced games is what it actually is, and it's a marketing stunt is what people are missing. Because if we actually look at the enhanced games, the games itself is a front, it's a marketing tool for enhanced.com. If you go onto enhanced.com, the website, the very first thing you see is a big button that says get enhanced. If you go onto there, you can sign up for their subscription service. Their subscription service involves a blood test that you send in to a doctor. A doctor then will prescribe you testosterone or your own personalized enhanced program. And for a couple of $100 a month, they will deliver out your testosterone and your other supplements or whatever it is. So that is their ultimate aim, is to become essentially a testosterone dealer in the States and probably internationally, and become kind of the largest distributor of testosterone. Because when we think of the investors behind there, Peter Thiel, Trump Jr., these aren't people that are interested in sport or how fast can someone run. These are these kind of technocrat billionaires that probably have a pseudo-god complex and now are obsessed with living as long as they want, or as long as they possibly can. So the two aims is to make money, and then to probably use this as some sort of experimentation process to kind of normalize experimenting with these performance enhancing substances with whatever their ultimate aim is. But when you think of Peter Thiel, Trump Jr., these type of people, they're probably not benevolent people, and they're doing it for the good of humanity.
So the real issue doesn't come from the safety of the athletes, because that can be medically controlled.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of people say, well, what if an it dies at this game?
Yeah, because that's I would imagine that's the general population's first reaction is like, they're going to fill them with drugs, and this is going to be very unhealthy for that athlete, and they don't think about the societal downstream effects that you're speaking about.
100%. So the commentary we tend to hear is, this is extremely dangerous, someone's going to die, what's going to happen? Now, if we take enhanced games at face value for what they're saying they're going to do, they're claiming that the athletes are only going to use FDA approved products, testosterone being the main one, but EPO and these other ones probably then as well. They're going to do everything under medical supervision, so they're getting full medical screening in advance. They're all heading out to Abu Dhabi in January, I believe, and they're going to go on the performance enhancing drugs for between January and March for, they say, a couple of weeks at low doses, and then they're going to come off them, cycle off them for the games. Now, if we look at the transformation that the swimmer had last summer, I can tell you that the transformation he had was not done with low doses over a short period of time. But also, again, if you are trying to break world records, why would you do low doses for a short period of time? But anabolic steroids are not drugs that people acutely die from. The health risks associated with anabolic steroids are chronic ones that happen over many years of use. So the idea, we have this idea, is like, someone injects testosterone and then they collapse on the floor. That doesn't really happen in people that we can always have adverse freak reactions to a drug as with any drug, but that's just not how testosterone and anabolic steroids work. So the health risks to these athletes, if they're doing what they say they're doing, that they're using a handful of compounds that are FDA approved under medical supervision for low doses over a short period of time, if that is the case, the health risk is minimal in my opinion. There's very low health risks. The problem is, what does this have a knock-on influence on society for maybe younger people, or is it going to increase normalized use of these performance-enhancing drugs in society as a whole? These athletes are getting pharmaceutical grade testosterone, pharmaceutical grade whatever it is, the best, purest quality stuff we would imagine they're getting. If we take Ireland as a case study, anabolic steroids are not legal in Ireland without a prescription. We can go to a doctor and we can be prescribed testosterone, cypionate, entantate, or whatever they're using from a doctor, and we can get it pharmaceutical grade. The majority of anabolic steroid users are using it for, say, bodybuilding or aesthetic image and performance enhancing, are getting it through a legal route. So it's coming through a steroid dealer, and when we're going to the black market for this stuff, that's going to bring in the risk of, do we know that what we're getting is what it says on the label? Is there contaminants in there? And we've seen from several studies where they've tested stuff that's been acquired through the black market, that we do see the concentrations are different than what's supposed to be. The compound in there mightn't be what it's labelled. We have heavy metals, we have other toxins that are potentially in there. No, that's not, it's like every drug, there's plenty of people getting probably good quality stuff, but in an unregulated, unlicensed market where we're relying on essentially gangland, because if you look at because of the secretive nature of it, we don't have huge amounts of data, but when we look at seizure data of drugs being seized by An Garda Síochána or at the ports, steroids are always seized alongside cannabis, cocaine, these other illegal drugs. So that would suggest that a lot of them are being imported by whoever's importing these other drugs as well. So we're probably contributing to gangland crime potentially in it then as well.
Here's a question then. Do you not think that there's a potential upside to, let's say if we have the enhanced games and it's very much open and in front of everyone, that a downstream impact of that would be it's more open in regards to, because we can say that people are taking anabolic steroids, like teenagers are taking them now. We have the rise in muscle dysmorphia and stuff like that anyway, so kids are actually getting it on the black market. Do you think that there'd be more of an open conversation for teenagers who are going to do it anyway now actually getting better quality drugs because there is more of an open conversation on this as a downstream effect from the enhanced games?
Potentially. So everything's going to have pros and cons, and that's potentially one of the pros. We're having this conversation now about it. I've been on national media talking about it, so it does raise awareness. The problem is the way we talk about it a lot of time. A lot of people will come on and it's instant demonization and just stigma of users. That doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. We have demonized and stigmatized cannabis users, cocaine users, every sort of user for the last 60 years. And that kind of, that war on drugs effort doesn't seem to work. What does seem to work is decriminalization, not turning people who are using these compounds into criminals. So decriminalizations and a more empathetic approach where we have to understand why people are using and meet them at the level they're at. So I do think we need to be much more empathetic. It's like, you know, alcohol, cannabis. We can tell young people, it's like, oh, this is really bad for you, don't do it. They're still going to do it.
Yeah.
So we know telling people that don't do this thing. And the thing with anabolic steroids, they're very effective.
Yeah.
You know, that's why they're banned, and that's why people take them, is because they're very effective at doing what they're supposed to do. They make you bigger, faster, stronger, you know, increase sex drive, increase all these you know, feelings of energy, wellness. They are the positive effects that can happen from them. There are a laundry list of negative effects that can be associated as well.
Can you speak about them real quick?
Yeah, 100%. So when we look at people who use, and I suppose I should be framed of, when I talk about performance enhancing drugs, that's an umbrella term.
Yeah.
So we call them now IPEDs, image and performance enhancing drugs. That's an umbrella term for, if we look at WADA, if we look at, because you and I both use performance enhancing drugs. Every day when we drink our cup of coffee, that is a performance enhancing drug. Caffeine is a performance enhancing drug. If you use nicotine, it's a performance enhancing drug. The only difference is we as a society and WADA deem them as socially acceptable and acceptable performance enhancing drugs to use. There are 6 kind of categories that WADA would look at that are banned substances. Anabolic steroids and anabolic agents are just one of those categories. You have stimulants, another one, methamphetamines. Then you have, you know, an other category where you could have beta blockers. And there's 3 categories of prohibition then as well. So there's ones that are prohibited all the time, and there's ones that are prohibited only in competition, and then there's substances that are prohibited in certain sports. For example, darts. There's certain drugs that are allowed in other sports that you will get done for doping in darts. That's beta blockers if anyone's interested. So people would be like, well, why would a darts player or a chess player, why would a chess player be doping? We see doping in chess, we see doping in darts. That would be a beta blocker because it lowers your heart rate. So you think of anything where you need to be still and calm and not nervous, beta blockers. And we've seen cases of, you know, reports and case studies of surgeons potentially using like beta blockers to lower their heart rate and different things. So
could that not be could be a net positive then?
Potentially, and this is why we probably need to have this conversation. And so that's when I'm talking about performance enhancing drugs. That's the broad category. So it's when people talk about they're taking steroids, I'm like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Or even anabolic steroids. Currently under WADA, there's 70 odd compounds that are listed as an anabolic steroid that are banned. There's potentially hundreds, if not more. They all, well, 99.9% of them they have a testosterone backbone and something else attached onto testosterone. So they're all kind of a testosterone base, and depending on what way it's formulated, it'll be a slightly different version of testosterone that acts in a slightly different way. That has different half-life or just acts in the body a little differently. But when we use these compounds for a long period of time, with every compound and every substance, the poison is in the dose. So if we think of, you know, saturated fat, is it bad for us? It depends. How much are you taking and how long are you taking that for? You know, salt. If we don't have any salt in our diet, we die.
Yeah.
If we have too much of it for too long, that leads to hypertension and other potential negative effects, or, you know, hypernatremia if we take too much salt in a short space of time. So anabolic steroids and testosterone is the same thing. If someone is taking a very small amount, is there a risk associated? Yeah, maybe, but probably not all that much. The risk comes when we take super physiological doses, so more than what the body naturally produces or what we would naturally have in the human body, and we take that over a long period of time. When we see anabolic steroid users that take those, kind of abuse the substances, take way too much, several years, cardiovascular one is the big one we're probably all aware of. So we can see changes in lipid metabolism, so to how we kind of break down fats, and we can then have a build-up of plaque or hardening of the artery, so it can lead to stroke, heart attack. These hormones, again, our heart is muscle. So there's androgen receptors there, so we can see an enlarging of the heart, thickening of the heart wall. So that can cause stress in the heart. Liver toxicity, we can see it damage the liver, especially if you're taking oral.
Can it increase cancers as well?
Yeah, potentially. So it's anabolic. Anabolic is, promoting growth. Mm-hmm. If you have a tumour there, there's tumours are going to try grow and replicate. So if you're taking an anabolic agent, depending on the type of tumour and type of anabolic, it can exacerbate growth. It can, accelerate the growth of that cancer, definitely. We see that. What else? There's probably the side effects everyone's aware of. Baldness if you're predisposed to male pattern baldness, it'll increase that. It can increase gynecomastia, so this kind of development of breast tissue. The ones that probably would scare me the most, and there's a little bit of data coming out, but it's still an evolving field. There's androgen receptors in the brain. It does seem to be that it can potentially augment and accelerate brain aging. So if someone is predisposed to developing dementia, potentially brings it on earlier. Whether it causes dementia, we're not sure, but it seems to be there's still preliminary data coming out. Then there's the psychological issues.
Well, I was going to say, is the steroid rage a real thing, or is it
It's probably misunderstood. There are so. Again, if any female listeners as they want to go to, because a lot of my research has been in the menstrual cycle or hormonal contraceptives, any woman will tell you that fluctuations in hormones can have an effect on your mood and your irritability and different things like that, without having too much of a misogynist sweeping statement there. But
clip that.
Yeah, but it certainly can. So same thing, we're taking these hormones into the body. It's going to augment our hormonal environment.
Yeah.
It definitely can change our mood, definitely can change how we feel. If someone is kind of predisposed to being a bit more irritable anyway, it seems to be it can exacerbate those personality traits in someone. There's definitely these compounds, and if you talk to users, there's certain compounds, Anavar is one, that people were like, I can't take that because I get so anxious, and so it has such an effect on me. So depression is another one. A lot of people can suffer with low mood as a result of anabolic steroid use. Conversely, people with low testosterone can also suffer from anxiety, depressive symptoms. So like everything, there's a balance. Having too little is bad, having too much for a long period of time. And then there's probably the ones that people forget, like most anabolic steroid users are going to be injecting. So there's the risk of getting infection in the site if you're not hygienic with your ones. You can get blood-borne diseases if it's a dirty needle or whatever it is. Or again, if you're buying a contaminant, you might be injecting a contaminant into your body, so that can lead to necrosis, infection. So there are those things. So there's a lot of things that potentially can be associated with long-term abuse.
What about when you spoke about psychological as well? I presume if we're speaking in the context of like teenagers, gym users, and body image and body dysmorphia and stuff like that, I would presume.
Well, that's where we get into dependency. Because people will talk about steroid addiction, and I remember talking to someone once. This guy, very interesting character. He described himself as a performance pharmacologist. So he is a full-time doping coach. He works with athletes, designs their doping protocols, and consults on how they should use them. And himself has been using anabolic steroids for 40 years. And I asked him that question. And again, this guy is, he publicly speaks about it. Project Chavez is his name.
I think I've heard of that name.
US guy. So I ended up, we were sitting in a cafe in, Bang Bang in Drumcondra. Not Drumcondra, Fitzroy. Bang Bang. So this kind of hipster cafe, and it was 8:30 in the morning, sitting there drinking coffee, and I asked him that question. I was like, Broderick, because people say they're addictive. It's like, what's your take on that? Now he's a big brash, he's 5'2" maybe, and 100 odd kilos, but real loud guy. And he turns in the middle of the cafe. He's like, what I'll tell you is like, let me ask you this. He's like, you take steroids, what do they do? Turn you into fucking Superman. He's like, you're bigger than you ever were, stronger than you ever were. He's like, you can fuck like a porn star. He's like, would you go back to being normal after that? And I was like looking, and I could see people looking at me in the corner. I was dipping the head here. And
well, there's a degree of truth in that, isn't there?
So that's one of the questions that we have to ask young guys when I say, if you're considering using these, again, telling them the negative effects, it'll shrink your testicles, it'll affect your fertility, you know, it might limit your ability to have children down the road. When you're 18 years of age, you don't care. You want to be big, you want to be stronger. Yeah. And they hear that other work. They do work. But what I always say to the younger people that might be considering it, what's your exit strategy? Because there's two options. You're going to stay on these till you die, or you come off them at some point. So which is it? Do you plan on being on anabolic steroids till you're 80?
Yeah.
Or do you plan on coming off them at some stage? And if you're coming off them, when will you come off them? Because if you go long enough, you won't be able to come off them. You become medically dependent on them. The other thing then is they are highly effective. To minimize the risks associated with anabolic steroid use. So if someone has decided, you know what, I'm going to take anabolic steroids because I want to be bigger, because I want to be stronger, I know they will potentially damage my health, well then the goal is to minimize the risk that they're going to have to your health. In order to do that, you would recommend that someone takes low doses over a long period of time and they get medically monitored while you're doing that. If these compounds are effective and you're taking them because you have an insecurity that I'm not big enough, you know, I just want to be bigger, and you're putting your self-worth wrapped up in your physique, well then, are you going to bring the dose down if you need to? Or are you going to say, well, you know, if I'm taking 300 mgs a week and I'm getting this much, what if I push it to 4?
Yeah, and
what if I push it to 5?
And the paradox is the bigger they get, the smaller they feel.
Yeah, and that's it. And then all of a sudden it's, well, who am I? My personality is I'm the big guy in the gym. Yeah. Without that, I have a friend of mine, Stephen Manuel, Screamer used to go by, world record powerlifter, world champion, struggled with alcoholism throughout much of his lifting career. So you'd have the high of winning the world championship or competing at worlds, and then he'd go into a depth of depression. But I remember having a chat with him, and one of the biggest issues he dealt with was his identity was wrapped up in being strong. He would be out in the club or in a pub, and his friends would bring, you know, girls over or whatever. It's like, oh, he can squat 300 kilos. And he'd be like, well, don't be telling people that. You know, because he was very much, well, what if I can't squat that anymore? He's like, am I less valuable now? It's like, are you only friends with me because I'm strong? He's like, is that the only reason you want to know me is because I can lift really heavy things? So again, it's another good friend of mine, Hugh Gilmore, a performance psychologist, just talk about describing, you don't want to have a one banjo string. And he's a good man for the puns or the innuendos. He knows what he's saying when he says these things. But he's like, imagine you have a banjo with one string. He's like, it's a very shit banjo, isn't it? He's like, because that's, if you only identify with that one thing, that's all I am, is I'm strong, and that's my whole identity, or I'm big and muscly, that's my whole identity. But what if you break that one banjo string, you just say, and you know, that's gone. What else do you have? He's like, you want to develop and have multiple strands to your identity and your personality, that this is not who I am. I'm not defined by being big and strong. Where if that is your one, well then you're never going to come off. You're more likely to slip into pushing higher dosages, pushing on safe dosages for longer periods of time, because you get bigger. And there is this, you know, dose response. The more you take, probably the bigger and stronger you're going to get. But the more you take, the health risk goes up and up.
And I suppose when we're speaking about, all right, these athletes who are going to have the best of care, and they'll probably have psychologists and stuff like that as well, well, you would hope, when they're dosing for these games. But then the downstream impact of, okay, you know, they're selling this on websites to college students. They're not going to have you know, a psychologist at hand to speak to them about their body image issues.
No, and again, it's that medical sport. So if I was talking to someone, and if someone is listening, has made that decision, you know, I'm going to go on anabolic steroids, I'm going to get them through the deal, or I'm going to take the risk that there might be contaminants, but you know, they're going to do it. The other question I'd ask, like, okay, what's your budget here? The steroids themselves, not that expensive. But are you willing to go talk to your GP about this? Are you willing to get a blood test every 3-6 months to make sure that, you know, your lipid profile, your LDL and your cholesterol is not elevating? your hematocrit, a lot of people will self-prescribe, and your hematocrit, your red blood cells, start to increase as a consequence of the use. If your blood gets too thick, that's when we get clots and strokes happening. So I'd ask someone, well, can you afford to do that? And if you're not willing to do that then as well, probably you're just layering on more and more risk. The other thing that frightened me one time, I remember a good few years ago, my barber at the time was talking to me about, he was starting on steroids. And this is, again, when you ask guys like, well, what are you taking? They're like, steroids. It's like, again, I said, that's 70 odd. What are you taking now? In reality, what's on the market is probably, 10 different ones you could be taking. Yeah. But again, they don't know. They're just taking whatever they're told to take. And I was asking him the next time I was in with him, I was like, how are you getting on? He's like, I've actually switched my dealer. He's like, there's another guy he's doing it 10 or cheaper. And I was like, so now you're shopping around for who'll give you the cheapest illegal steroids. Yeah. I was like, that's probably most of them how they're made. If they're not from pharmaceutical companies, the powders are being bought in from China. They're being remixed with the liquid here in Europe, usually in someone's kitchen or something, and they're sealing the bottle and selling it out. So again, they're probably full of contaminants, a lot of risks there going on, and now you're shopping around for who's doing the cheapest. And it's funny, these are the same people that, again, we won't get too political, but they're like, won't take a vaccine. They're like, I don't know what's in that, I'm not injecting that into my body. But you'll inject this other thing without even thinking twice. Where if they put the same critical thinking across both, you probably end up
there's a bit of cognitive dissonance there. Well, I suppose leading on to that, let's talk a little bit about men's health then and TRT in a medical standpoint, because like you said, the downstream effects of this is that you demonise steroids, and there's a lot of potential benefits for steroids, especially for a specific group of people. Yeah,
so I'm very much interested in men's health, and one of those areas in particular is testosterone therapy and the potential applications of testosterone therapy. So that's probably what people don't realise then as well. So these anabolic steroids, these weren't developed for athletes. If we take a very brief history lesson of how doping came about in sport, well, you can even go right back, if we go to ancient Greece and Rome and these type of places, they had an understanding that, the testicles seemed to play some sort of role in virility, and, we had like eunuchs and different things, and there was different culture things around it. But we didn't really understand, we didn't isolate testosterone itself till the mid-1930s. But again, as a aside, there was a Russian surgeon, Sergei Voronov, made a fortune in the late 1800s, early 1900s, lived like a king in Paris. He used to do testicle transplants. So for the rich and famous, this was the big thing in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where he would take, usually from chimpanzees, take the testicles from them and implant them into the scrotum of wealthy people, that usually middle to older age men. You can look this up, there's some great images and papers on it, but with the idea was get the young testicles, or in the older fella, it'll give him the virality. so mainly chimpanzees, sometimes goat. Now,
did any of this go terribly wrong?
No, so placebo, they felt great. And people used to pay a fortune for this. Thing was, so he was just getting the testicles and putting them in there. He wasn't hooking them up or anything. No. So the testicles were pretty much instantly rejected, and they'd die off and turn to scar tissue. But these people felt great. Another one, the medical officer, I don't know if you're Johnny Cash fans, but San Quentin, the medical officer in San Quentin in the 1920s, Joe Stanley was his name. Some of the inmates who were executed in San Quentin, he took their testicles and did the same thing, did the testicle transplants to others. So that was kind of, before we had testosterone, people were chasing this idea of there's something in the testicles that if we get the young ones and, can revitalise us. Then you had this guy, Ernst Lacker, around mid-1930s, synthesised testosterone, so from bull testicle, and we got the first synthesis of testosterone. Now, as you can imagine, mid-1930s in Europe, I believe actually he was a Jewish man himself, and he actually had to flee then from to avoid Nazis. The history gets a bit murky around there. Yeah. But apparently, the story goes that testosterone was then administered to soldiers in the trenches in World War II that were malnourished, and they realised when we give them the testosterone, they seem to put on a bit of size again and a bit more, a bit of virality back in them. So there was this signs that maybe injecting testosterone into people does benefits. World War II ended. You then had the development of the Cold War. You then had in 1954 the weightlifting World Championships in Vienna, where the Russians apparently were injecting testosterone before going out and lifting. There was
the Russians were really the trailblazers of this, weren't they?
100%. There was a doctor there, so it was the Americans and Russians. The Russians went out, did heavy lifts, they were seen injecting testosterone. There was a doctor there, Dr. Ziegler was his name, American. Came back to America and he developed a different form of testosterone anabolic steroid called the Anabol. He was the one that gave the Anabol. Then that led to the rise of doping in the and then the Cold War between the USSR and the USA. The Olympics was, who could bring the better drugs essentially to the Olympics. He also worked with Arnold Schwarzenegger, all those.
Could you see a trend in world records and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, you can see it's a massive going up. Then you come across to 1967, the International Olympic Council banned anabolic steroids. Interestingly, first reliable test to detect anabolic steroids was a decade later in 1976. So, but then since then you had the development of WADA in subsequent years and that. That's kind of that history. But testosterone was first synthesized for medical reasons. Most of these drugs that we ban in sport were first developed for medical reasons and to treat. Again, if you're cynical, you can start to look at how many people have therapeutic use exemptions. That is, you can apply that on a medical ground, you need this medication and therefore you can get granted to use it in sport. Have a look at how many elite tennis players have asthma and are now able to use the inhalers. Have a look at how many professional basketball players are low in testosterone, have clinically low testosterone and are allowed to use TRT. We see this across, or some of this stuff in plain sight, but these compounds were developed for medical use.
Can I just interject there? So that's very, very fascinating, and I suppose that's an argument that people will make about the enhanced games, that it's finally putting things on an even playing field, because athletes are going to find a way to get the upper hand, and I suppose it only takes one or two to be what was it in the cycling? I think the number 13th or something in the Tour de France was the only one that wasn't enhanced.
So we know, again, this is the societal question. This is why I think we shouldn't just shut everything down. It's good to have these debates and be able to talk about it in a nuanced and context way. It depends on what do we want sport to be. And again, I can give both sides the argument. So if I go to one extreme, and I'm probably in a unique position that I know people across the spectrum that are staunch people for clean sport, and I know Broderick Chavez on the other end, where he will argue that his argument that testing in sport is unethical. He's like, by forcing people to test, he's like, it forces them to use illegal compounds unsupervised and get more and more experimental, where his argument, if you allowed it, then we could make it really safe. That would be his argument on that side. Where another one, a friend of mine, Dominic Monelli, made the argument to me last week. He looked up, what was the original idea behind the modern Olympics? And it was that purity of sport, purity of competition. And again, I don't have skin in the game either way as such. I don't give a strong opinion either way. But I think it's interesting at societal level. Well, what do we want sport to be? Do we want sport to be, it's about that purity and fairness of competition, where we're not taking these, it's not who can get the best drugs or who can be the best chemist. It's about, again, people argue, well, you're born with different genetics, is it level the playing field? I don't know, but it's about you against your fellow man or your fellow woman, where we both had the same resources, we both had access to the same things, and this competition says you versus I, and it's going to be a totality of our preparation here. and yes, luck and serendipity is going to play a role, but that's it. So again, it's what do we want sport to be, and that at a site level we need to have that conversation.
Sorry, going back to then TRT in terms of modern men's health. Then
yes.
What does low testosterone in older men or
not even in older men?
What can you give me? Do you have a bit of the statistics or research around low testosterone in modern men?
Yeah. So the technical term for it is hypogonadism. So your gonads, your testicles, and hypo meaning low. So it's that we're producing low levels of testosterone. There are markers for what that would be. If anyone's going to get a blood test, it's kind of below 8 nanomoles. But testosterone have normal levels. If we use kind of people, it depends on what measurement you're using. Your scale, like you'll hear people talk about like between 200 and 1,000. If I'm talking about nanomoles, it's a different measure. But normal testosterone on the blood test we would use is between 12 and 30, which is a huge range. Like someone could have double the testosterone, but both of you are clinically normal. 8 to 12 is okay. There might be stuff going on here if there's symptoms associated. Below 8 is low testosterone. We do see as men get older, there's what some would call the menopause. So that would be naturally declining levels of testosterone as we age. Interestingly, when you get married or become a father, your testosterone levels decrease.
I heard that before.
Yeah.
What's the logic behind that?
It is a phenomenon we seem to see. The evolutionary biologists would say that it is because your role is changing.
Yeah.
By lowering that testosterone, you potentially become more caring, more
less
nurturing,
risk taking,
these type of things. And in fairness, if you talk to anyone, I'm not a father, but if you talk to anyone that is, they will say once they've had children, they're even driving the car, like, I should slow down a bit here. I have a family to take care of. So there potentially is that change. How that probably varies hugely between people, but we do see that. Now, for a lot of men, if they stay active, they're eating well, sleeping well, low stress, that natural decrease in testosterone doesn't seem to have much of an issue. That they can still live a full life and they're full of energy. For some, their testosterone levels come down so low where there would be what we'd call low test, and those type of men will have erectile dysfunction, low sex drive, low mood, potentially anxiety, decreased muscle mass, decreased bone mass. So, and again, there's chicken and egg. By not exercising, you're losing muscle mass and then potentially impeding your thing. So all the things we do that probably have a negative effect we associate with health will negatively impact our testosterone. Smoking, too much alcohol, having too high levels of body fat. Anyone who is diabetic is at potential risk, increased risk of low testosterone. So in these cases, if someone is presenting with low testosterone on a blood test, we'd usually do 2 tests to confirm, and they're exhibiting the symptoms, well then there seems to be a lot of benefits for medically prescribed testosterone replacement therapy, and that is giving them exogenous testosterone that brings them back into the normal range. Now that is different. The testosterone that you would prescribe is the exact same anabolic steroids that athletes would take. The difference is the dose. In a medical context, we're bringing you back into normal clinical range. In a performance enhancing for sport, we're taking super physiological doses. We're taking more than naturally is found in the body. Again, when we see that we bring someone back into the normal physiological range, that seems to be very beneficial for their health. Increased mood, increased physical performance, decreased, there used to be this idea that increased cardiovascular disease seems to be protective against cardiovascular disease now on the data that's coming out now. So it seems very, very beneficial. Problem is, because of the demonization of testosterone in steroid users, a lot of men are kind of stigmatized for thinking of using testosterone that way. And they're not telling people, or they might feel a sense of shame. A lot of them will say, I'm not going to go on that testosterone because that's just chasing youth. The way I feel is just a natural part of aging. Where it's not. Now, the reasons you'd have what we call primary and secondary hypogonadism. So there can be just genetic and underlying reasons why people develop that.
Right, so you could be doing all the lifestyle factors correctly, you could be training, you could be sleeping
and it
well.
can happen. It can be just a dysfunction within the system. Or we can have kind of a lifestyle inflicted one, which is a result of poor lifestyle and poor exercise habits. Problem is, you tell someone, well, you need to just, get out there and exercise. This could be a man that's like, I am so tired and my mood is so low, I've no motivation to get up and exercise. We do the testosterone therapy, and it's always, we want a lifestyle change along with this. But all of a sudden, that bit of testosterone might be that kind of chicken, where before the egg, where, oh, now I feel a bit better. I'm actually in the mood to go do exercise, and then we get this synergistic effect where, okay, they're feeling a bit better, they'll start exercising, and that's having a benefit, and we'll keep going that way. But probably because of that stigma, there's a lot of GPs that are hesitant to even consider testosterone therapy as a viable therapy. Research is probably not done enough because a lot of ethics boards are afraid to just associate testosterone injections with anabolic steroid use and don't understand the risks. So I think we need to start understanding it as a more viable, and I'm lucky enough that we're collaborating on research with Dr. Emmett Byrne and Dr. Martin Rourke. They're actually based here in Bray, but they're moving up to the Beacon, and they run a very successful men's health clinic where we're starting to, in DCU, run some of these research studies to start to measure the long-term effects of using testosterone therapy in men.
I thought this comes back to the point you made that stigmatizing and shame around these drugs or any drugs really doesn't benefit anyone.
No, especially not. Because again, a lot of these, there's a very unique, so I call it kind of this testosterone use continuum, where we have the medically supervised TRT users. They're engaging with their doctor, and they are, they came in because they felt some symptoms, low mood, low sex drive, whatever it may be, but they weren't happy with how they were feeling, and this therapy seems to be very, very beneficial, and it's changing lives of many men. The other end of the spectrum, you have anabolic steroid users taking huge amounts of self-prescribed testosterone, usually not with medical supervision. You also have a unique cohort in the middle that I find fascinating, and these are men who are self-prescribing testosterone, so they're buying it from the same place the steroid users are buying it, and they're self-prescribing testosterone because they're listening to Joe Rogan and they're like, I want to go on TRT, but they're not going to their doctor. So they're self-prescribing, but they don't identify as steroid users. They're like, no, this is just for my health. I'm just doing this for my health because, I'm low on T. But then when you look at the dosages you're using, it's like, that's not a TRT dose. It's a low-level anabolic steroid dose you're using there. But they're not engaging with their doctor because they don't understand that this could be affecting their blood work. So if you go on medically prescribed TRT, you're getting blood tests every 3 months. And again, like any drug, you might have to change the dosage, the type, this exact type we use, because it might be negatively affecting some blood markers. So we want to minimize that use. But the thing is, the reason that the self-prescribing TRT users and the anabolic steroid users, why do they not engage with their GP? That's what I'm interested in. And how do we get them engaging with their GP? So even if you are using anabolic steroids because you want to be the next Mr. Olympia, how can we change the conversation that they're comfortable enough to go down to their GP and say, can we do this blood test because I'm worried about my lipids or I'm worried about my hematocrit going up, where they can have a non-judgmental conversation with their doctor who might rightly say, look, as a medical doctor, I advise you these compounds are dangerous and you shouldn't be on them, but they still will allow them medical care. We've got much better in recent years with understanding how to support people with addiction through more empathetic medical approach. We need to start to do the same with people using performance-enhancing drugs. We're not going to reduce the risks associated with use by stigmatizing and demonizing use. We're going to do it with an empathetic approach where we work with them. We've had some success with needle exchanges we see in the UK where people can go in and swap their needles. Little things like this. But again, we need to educate both the GPs that they understand, because the other reason a lot of these users will not engage with their doctor, they're like, my doctor doesn't understand. If I go in and start talking about these, they don't understand. So we probably do need some upskilling in GPs and the medical field, but we need to have a more empathetic and non-judgmental approach to discussing use with these users.
Moving on from men's health to women's performance, I wanted to talk to you about the research that you shared. So new research from Dublin City University explores the menstrual cycle, hormonal contraceptives and pelvic floor dysfunction in athletes playing ladies, Gaelic football and camogie. Can you tell me a little bit more about that research and what stood out for you?
Sure. Last couple of years I've done a lot of work kind of around female athlete. I joke I spend a lot of my time mansplaining the menstrual cycle to women. That's a lot of my time. But that particular research I was supervising, done with a student, Poppy G. McGuire, who we surveyed over 400 Gaelic Games athletes across ladies football and camogie, all at the senior level, in both club and inter-county. And again, try to map the landscape around menstrual cycle characteristics, symptomology and hormonal contraceptive use, and then also pelvic floor, because there's been quite a lot of research across different sports now around kind of menstrual cycle symptomology and contraceptive use. That's basically where you're asking, characteristics of menstrual cycle, how long is your cycle, how long is the bleeding phase, different things, do you have any menstrual dysfunction, and then what symptoms are you perceiving with that menstrual, associated with the menstrual cycle, and do you believe it has an impact on your performance? And same thing around hormonal contraceptives. So that side of thing was pretty much in line with what we've previously found in other sports, and that is half of athletes or a bit more are using the form of hormonal contraceptive, so they don't have a menstrual cycle because they're on hormonal contraceptive. And the ones that are naturally menstruating, they perceive, a good proportion of perceive that they have a lot of symptoms that they attribute to their menstrual cycle: cramping, mood changes, low back pain, increased sweating, these type of things. And a large proportion of those will say it negatively impacts their performance. So that's kind of broadly in line with what we would see. Now, what I will say is that's highly variable between individuals, and then also the participants say cycle to cycle, it varies quite a lot. So there's no kind of one size fits all approach to that. What we did that other researchers failed to do, we've actually asked about some signs of potential pelvic floor dysfunction. So interestingly, about 1/3 of the players experience urinary leakage during training or matches, either all the time or occasionally. And that is something that's probably stigmatized in sport and not talked about. Like, a lot of people would say, oh, there's a taboo around the menstrual cycle in women's sport and we don't talk about that. Maybe I've just been immersed in it too long. I think we've overcome that a lot. Any female teams I've worked with, I think people are much more aware that the menstrual cycle is an issue we need to be aware of.
Yeah, I found even it went very mainstream with like personal trainers, and I'll be like, oh, I know about the menstrual cycle. Look at me, and then there was kind of like this is the one way you have to train your clients because they're weaker at this stage for the strength training. And then obviously research came out dismissing that like, listen, if you feel strong, go and lift the PB.
The phase-based training, and it frustrates me in one way because it's great we're getting more education, kind of the female-specific issues, but then a PT or an SSC coach to learn about that, and then everything revolves around that. We shouldn't just boil down female athletes or female clients to the reproductive system. That's just one area.
And there was that sinking cycle like course that people were trying to sell, I think.
There is. Anyone that's kind of selling that to train a certain way based on menstrual cycle, it's BS.
I thought that.
But the pelvic floor has probably been dismissed a bit, where we don't talk about that, where a lot of girls, 1/3 are having urinary leakage, 40% of them having urinary urgency, and we see that when women start exercise, that have that strong feeling to go, intense urge to go to the toilet. We have anal incontinence, so fecal incontinence then in a proportion then as well, and gentle pain. So these type of things, and again we've seen in sport, maybe if we think of dropout in sport, why this is an issue. We know dropout in adolescent girls is a big issue in sport. If you, every time you train or go intense for a ball or lift heavy in the gym, a little bit of urine drips out, of course if you think that that's not normal, that doesn't happen to a lot of people, that can be very embarrassing for you and very stigmatizing, and definitely could be something that would make you shy away and potentially leave sport. So I think we need to get better at normalising the conversation around that. And probably the frustrating or saddening thing about it, it's very treatable. with athletic development and physiotherapy, we can do pelvic floor interventions where we strengthen up those pelvic floor muscles, and we can see a very significant reduction in those experiences of urinary leakage, urinary urgencies. So a lot of these girls are suffering in silence where they shouldn't. You know, we can definitely work with them. So I think that's the next stage. We need to get more aware of the potential role of the pelvic floor and pelvic floor dysfunction in sport.
And that's it's quite common to be focused on your pelvic floor after like postpartum, and it's very normalised in that degree. So
and that's when you talk to people, that's what a lot of people say. It's like, oh, I thought it was only something that postpartum women or older women suffered with, not very fit 20-year-old inter-county players.
Yeah, interesting. Also, I wanted to touch on before I let you go as well. Obviously, the Dublin Marathon was just completed there a couple of days ago, and I think running has gotten very trendy over the. Have you noticed?
Yeah.
So, and I suppose you did a talk on preparing people for a marathon. Can you explain what you spoke about?
Yeah, so there was 4 of us above, 4 researchers in DCU, and we all took different aspects: psychology, nutrition, injury prevention. I talked about strength training. Obviously, I talk about essentially preaching the gospel of strength training, because there's very few domains where getting stronger is going to have a negative effect. I can't think of any, really. And endurance running is one of those where people might think that to run 26.2 miles, being strong, I was getting stronger, I was increasing my deadlift or my squat, going to have a difference there. But the evidence is very robust and strong that anyone who increases their strength as an endurance runner, we see a big reduction in injury risk potentially. But the evidence probably on injury risk is mixed. It definitely doesn't increase injury risk, but it definitely might reduce it. So again, there's no negative effect there. But on performance, it is very, very effective at improving performance. So anyone that's a runner might be familiar with kind of running economy, that the amount of oxygen we use at a given velocity. It's something we'd measure in the lab, but if we improve that, you become a more efficient runner. So again, it probably makes sense that if your muscle is stronger, every stride we do, the contraction, the force requirements there are at a slightly lesser percentage of your maximum. So you're working at a slightly lower intensity. And things like plyometrics or improving the ankle stiffness, the ability of the Achilles tendon to act as a better spring when we're running is more efficient then as well. So we just see that overall getting people stronger and also getting stronger around the pelvic control. So we know a lot of runners can have issues with, lower back pain or pain around the hip area, overuse injuries around the hip area. So we see that runners who are stronger have better what we call pelvic control. So the muscles are better able to kind of stabilize and control the movement of the hips while they're running. And all these things come together. By being stronger, we're able to improve running performance, reduce injury risk, and reduce some of the negative symptoms associated with running. Now, I'll make the argument that we're not built to run long distances anyway. When you look at injury rates in sport, people think that, gym, you're going to get hurt in the gym, where the gym is the safest environment you can be. I was like, if you want to guarantee you're going to get injured, go run a marathon.
I see it on the weekend anyway, people limping everywhere.
Yeah, it's like when you talk about sport, a lot of sports is what happens if you get injured. If you're an endurance runner, it's what are you going to do when you get injured? Because anyone that's running multiple long distance events, they have some sort of injury. And most of them, a colleague of mine, Dr. Aoife Burke, would describe it as living in Nigel City, where most runners, they don't have an injury that's so bad that they can't run, but there's always something that just kind of aches me. And it's only after several months then it ends up kind of exacerbating and increasing to the point where they have to take time off.
Right, so athletes who are going to ignore you anyway.
Just get stronger.
What are just some common, let's say they're running now, and a lot of runners maybe they don't have gym experience, but they're like, right, because I'm taking this seriously now, I might as well take going to the gym a little bit more serious now. Is there any common mistakes that runners make when trying to add in some gym work?
Probably doing that kind of bodybuilding approach. Again, it doesn't have to be much, 1 to 2 gym sessions a week. It's going to do a lot for runners. Your simple movements, do something on 2 legs, that's kind of a squat or a hinge movement, a trap bar deadlift, do something on 1 leg, some sort of lunge, do something laterally, that's side to side, some sort of lateral lunge or something like that, and then concentrate on some of the other muscles around the hip. So try to get some glute med work. We'd see like clamshells or whatever. Try to do some things that strengthen the hip flexors and the stabilizers around the hips then as well. Would be something, and then work that ankle calf complex. Do the bicep curls. Not going to make you a better runner, but everyone wants bigger biceps.
But they're very important. Okay, David, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you very much. If people wanted to keep up with the work that you do, where can they find you online?
Social media handles are all at Dr. David Nolan, so straightforward enough. And then if you Google my name, David Nolan, put in DCU afterwards. If you put David Nolan, there's still this swimmer, this elite swimmer that kind of outranks me in SEO slightly, so I'm looking to come after him. But until then, if you put in David Nolan DCU, I'll pop up.
Well, if you want him to definitely pop up, make sure you subscribe to the Uneducated PT podcast. David, thank you for today.